Hello and welcome back to Power Skills with Janna. I'm Janna Jones, your leadership development specialist, coach, and mentor. And I'm so thrilled that you're joining me today because as we dive into a leadership essential, courageous conversations. Now, I know we often label these as difficult conversations, but I want us to take a moment to reframe that together because these aren't about showdowns or conflict. They are purposeful, authentic moments where you can give feedback, set boundaries, or share bold ideas to build trust and to drive impact. So, whether you're leading a team, aiming for a step up, or fostering a psychologically safe workplace or culture, courageous conversations are how you will lead with integrity. Today, we will unpack the science, the stories, and strategies to approach these conversations with confidence and connection. We'll explore how to prepare, engage, follow through, and even recognize others' courage to create a culture where everyone thrives. Now, let's shape your leadership presence one courageous moment at a time. But before we jump into it, it would mean the absolute world to me if you would hit subscribe wherever you are listening from. I put my heart and soul into these episodes to help you to lead with clarity and purpose, and your support keeps this community thriving. Thank you so much for being a part of that journey. I so appreciate you. All right, let's get started. Firstly, we'll always start with why. So, why do courageous conversations matter? Well, they are the heartbeat of leadership. They're not about being difficult, they're about creating connection, alignment, and growth. Whether it's giving constructive feedback, addressing a team's performance, or advocating for a psychologically safe environment, these moments define how you are seen as a leader and how your team flourishes. Neuroscience offers us a really powerful lens here as well. When you approach a conversation with empathy and clarity, your brain's prefrontal cortex, the part that handles rationale and reasoning, works in harmony with your limbic system, which governs emotions. This creates psychological safety for both you and the other person, effectively fostering trust. But when we fear or avoid, when avoidance starts to take over, your amygdala triggers a stress response, making conversations feel difficult instead. By reframing them as courageous, you can start to shift your mindset to focus on purpose and connection instead of tension and pressure. Remembering that what you focus on, you amplify. So it is best to take the time to reframe and make it easier on ourselves wherever we can. I worked with a leader in tech who hesitated to give feedback to a team member who was clearly struggling. They had excellent intentions. They just feared that it would feel confrontational for them and potentially further diminish that team member's confidence. Great intentions. But we worked together, preparing with intention and framing the conversation around shared goals and positive aligned outcomes. They turned what initially felt like an unbelievably difficult conversation into a courageous moment full of clarity. The team member not only improved, but expressed their gratitude for the honest feedback and the offer of support. That is the power of a courageous conversation. It helps us to build bridges and cultivate strength for us, for our teams, and ultimately for our organization. As a leader, these conversations shape your impact and create a workplace where everyone feels safe to speak up. By role modeling and acknowledging courage, you start to inspire others to do the same, cultivating a ripple effect that creates psychological safety. So let's get really practical and make courageous conversations the new norm. Step one that I would recommend would be preparation, because sometimes courageous conversations need to start with purpose, and preparation is key, especially where they may be a little bit tricky. We want to be setting the stage for connection rather than conflict here. So let's consider how you might go about it. Firstly, start by getting clear on your intention. What is the actual purpose of this conversation? Is it to align on goals? Is it to provide feedback or foster a safer culture? Be really clear on the outcome, like, I want us to collaborate better, or I really want to support this person's growth and development. And then anchor that in your values, grounding the conversation in values, whether they're your core values like integrity or collaboration, or perhaps the other person's values to make that bridge a little bit easier. Like their core values could be something like finding solutions or personal development, professional development. This keeps you and the conversation authentic, purposeful, and meaningful to the both of you. Then I would consider anticipating their perspective. It can be helpful to put yourself in another person's shoes. What might they be feeling? What are the barriers? Are you anticipating a little bit of defensiveness or perhaps misunderstanding that may arise? And how might you shape the conversations, whether that's your words or your actions, to overcome some of these barriers? Perhaps with a more empathetic and collaborative tone, for example. Then I would consider crafting your opening. Start with a clear, empathetic, and inviting opener, such as, I know we've been navigating conflicting priorities at the moment. Perhaps let's talk about how we can align and make progress on this project together. Let's do this together, actually. Before your next conversation, grab a notebook or use the notes app on your phone, unless you're driving, of course, and jot this down. What is my intention for this conversation? Which values will guide me? How might I overcome any barriers that may surface? And then, what is one way that I can show empathy for their perspective? So walking in their shoes, right? Preparation transforms a potentially difficult moment into a far more courageous one, paving the way for trust. Step 2 would be engaging authentically. Once you're in the conversation, it's really about showing up authentically to build connection. Here's how to engage effectively. Start by leading with empathy. Acknowledge their perspective, like, I know you've been juggling a lot with this project. These sorts of acknowledgements can help to lower defenses and creates a little bit of safety up front. Be clear and kind. Share your message directly, but with care, using I statements. So that's you taking ownership and sharing your impact. You statements can feel accusational and can create further barriers. So, for example, instead of you aren't meeting deadlines, which feels very closed, instead you might try an I statement and say something along the lines of, I've noticed that we're not aligning on deadlines, and I'd love to explore how we could make progress together. This avoids blame and fosters more dialogue, leaving space for ownership and accountability. Listen actively. Give the other person space to respond. Listen without interrupting and reflect back. For example, you might say something like, it sounds like you're feeling stretched thin. This shows that you've heard and listened to them, that you value their voice. Everyone wants to feel heard and listened to. And stay curious. Ask open-ended questions like, what do you think would help us to move forward? Or what support might you need in order to be successful? That sort of curiosity fosters collaboration and engagement rather than stoking confrontation. I coached a leader who needed to address their team's resistance to a new process. So instead of leading with directives, they opened with, look, I understand that change can feel unsettling. Can you perhaps share what's working and what's not? That shift to a conversation sparked a real dialogue and a solutions focus. Everyone then felt included and supported. Authentic engagement turns conversations into opportunities for growth and connection. Step 3, we want to try and navigate tension with grace wherever possible. Even with preparation, courageous conversations can sometimes hit tension, defensiveness, misunderstandings, or biases even. So it may be important to consider how we navigate them. Always stay calm. If emotions arise, pause and breathe. Don't fill the space with more words, even though you might want to. Your calming presence signals greater safety. That can reduce stress for both of you. Perhaps consider reframing some of the tension. So if the other person gets defensive, acknowledge it without judgment. You might say something like, "Look, I can see that this feels challenging for you. Perhaps we could try to focus on our shared goal instead. Would that help?" That may actually help the conversation to remain productive. Address any misunderstandings, don't ignore them. When someone feels incredibly activated, they will often miss some of what's really being said, and then they'll fill in the blanks with something more negative and aligned to how they were feeling at the time. If you notice that that's happening, it may be valuable to come back to the main intention of the conversation, perhaps sharing evidence or examples without blame or judgment. Pivot to solutions focus where possible, shifting from problems to possibilities, asking things like, "What can we do together to make this work?" This can help with a forward focus, which is a more positive lens than a backwards reflection onto the negative. Sometimes, unfortunately, it may not be helpful to continue the conversation at this time, so it's important to know when to stop and circle back at another time. Perhaps despite your best efforts, the other person may experience an amygdala hijack, activating their fight or flight response and making rational, calm, and considered conversation feel a little bit impossible. Where you think that this may be the case, it is really important to know when to call it. As you know what, we don't want to cause another person more stress than is needed, of course. So instead, perhaps you might say something like, "Look, maybe we could do with a pause at this time, and it would be more helpful if we continue the conversation at another time. Or maybe we could grab a coffee and be in a less formal setting and take a little breather." Whatever you think might work for both the situation and your relationship with that person. Being sure to show empathy while also covering your duty of care. So if it has gone quite awry, perhaps you might like to ask the person if they have support, or they may like someone to speak to where appropriate. If you're unsure of how to proceed after the conversation, it may be worth checking in with your human resource leader to gain some insights that could help, such as offering the individual a support person or another connection. I've found that with that open and authentic leadership, this is so very rarely the case, but we can't know what's going on for another person outside of work either. So even if we've walked in their shoes, even if we've done all of that effort, there could be something else influencing their responses, and it may be important to seek further support where of value for both you and the other person. A leader that I worked with faced some pushback when addressing a colleague's missed deadlines. By staying calm and asking, "Well, what support do you need in order to meet the timelines?" they turned that tension into a far more promising collaborative plan that strengthened their relationship over time. These courageous conversations do not shy away from tension, but they aim to navigate it with purpose instead. And step 4, if you've been listening for a while, you know that I'm going to say something about celebrating at this point. But I also want to acknowledge that following through is important too. So my step 4 would be following through and celebrating courage. Courageous conversations do not necessarily end when the meeting does. Following through and recognition are offering lasting impacts that should not be missed. As always, we're going to celebrate progress as well. So here's a few recommendations. My first would be commit to action. Agree on the next steps and accountability, because if you don't have any next steps, then it's just a nice chat, right? So it might be something like, "I'll share the updated plan with you by Friday so that you can review it by Monday, close of business." How does that sound? That sort of clarity and committing to action together ensures alignment moving forward. Checking in. So following up with a person. How do you feel the new approach is working? Is there anything that we could do better? This shows that you really do care about that aligned outcome and it reinforces trust. And it also adds additional engagement. You're asking the other person for their insights and input, therefore their buy-in. 3, acknowledge others' courage. When you see a colleague or a team member have a courageous conversation, it might be giving honest feedback or sharing a bold idea. Recognize it. A really simple, I appreciate how you spoke up today, or you sharing your feedback goes a really long way in supporting others. Thank you. That starts to foster a psychologically safe culture where everyone feels empowered to engage. And then, of course, celebrate your own courage. Acknowledge your effort as well. This stuff is so hard sometimes, and while these situations may feel easier to ignore, or you may think they'll sort themselves out, it's likely that it will just get worse over time when we ignore it. I promise you. Most of the HR teams that I have supported with their cultural interventions will tell you that it could have all been prevented with a courageous conversation early on, or if someone hadn't have said, actually, it'll just sort itself out over time, or I thought it would just get better on its own. So while it won't be perfect every time, celebrate your progress because your courage is so important in your leadership. Whether it's a coffee, a moment of gratitude, that celebrating releases dopamine, reinforcing your confidence for future conversations. I worked with a leader who, after a courageous conversation about team morale, followed up with check-ins. They recognized a team member's bold feedback in a meeting. Those actions, plus a team lunch to celebrate their progress together, built a stronger and safer culture. Your brain really does thrive in these moments, so do not skip the celebration, friends. Now for some power practices to master your own courageous conversations. Let's wrap up with a few actionable practices to make courageous conversations a leadership non-negotiable for life. Firstly, set your intention. So before your next conversation, write down one clear goal, like, I want to align on project priorities, or sometimes I will even use these in the meeting invitation. I'll title the meeting invitation something like aligning on project priorities, for example. 2, practice empathy. Start your next conversation with an empathetic opener, like, look, I know that you've been managing a lot. Let's explore how we can perhaps best support you. 3, recognize courage. Acknowledge one person's courageous conversation this week. It might be something like, I really admire how you shared that positive feedback with the team. It gives us great clarity on our strengths and what we can potentially do more of in future. And celebrate your own progress as well. Reward yourself for one courageous moment. Perhaps it's just a coffee, a walk, or a moment of gratitude. Just make it personal and make it yours. It's time for us to pause together and leverage some reflection questions to ignite your leadership. Now grab a pen and paper and think through these if you need to. Pause me if you want to dig a little bit deeper. Firstly, what is one courageous conversation I've been avoiding and why? I promise you there's usually one in there. And it's often for good reasons. We've been really busy. We think it will sort itself out. It's not that big a deal, right? What's one courageous conversation I've been avoiding and why? How might I anchor this conversation in values? Perhaps your own values like integrity or collaboration, or the values of the other person when you've walked in their shoes. What is one empathetic way that I can open up my next conversation? How might you start to use language in your communication to lead with empathy? What's one empathetic way that I can open up my next conversation? And of course, how will I celebrate my own courage or acknowledge someone else's this week? These questions aren't designed to be food for thought. They're designed to fuel action. we actually can't make progress unless we take the things that we're learning, that we're understanding, that we're thinking about back into our workplaces, back into our lives, and put them into action. So please let them be fuel for your action. Your answers will light your path to a braver and far more connected leadership. So your challenge this week, should you choose to accept it, and I hope you do, identify one courageous conversation that you need to have this week. It could be feedback, a boundary, or a bold idea for a safer culture. Prepare by writing your intention and an empathetic opener for yourself. Like, I know we've been navigating challenges. Let's talk about how we can start to make progress together. Have that conversation. And then celebrate with a small reward, like a coffee. Oh my gosh, I've said coffee a lot of times. I obviously need a coffee. Or a moment of gratitude, whatever is valuable and meaningful for you. As a bonus, acknowledge someone else's courage this week as well. This can create such a ripple effect in building positive psychological safety. That first step, it is rocket fuel to help propel you and your team forward. Challenge accepted? I certainly hope so. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining me in this episode of Power Skills with Janna. Courageous conversations are not about being difficult. They're about leading with authenticity, clarity, and connection. By preparing with purpose, engaging with empathy, navigating tension with grace, and recognizing courage in both yourself and others, you are not just leading, you're building a psychologically safe culture where everyone can thrive. If this episode has sparked something in you, I would love to hear about it. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Power Skills Development, or visit www.powerskillsdevelopment.com for tools, resources, and downloads. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to the weekly newsletter Power Pause. It is a reflection email and your gentle nudge to stay purposeful and lead with courage. And if you know someone who would benefit from these insights, please don't hesitate to share this episode to help them to shine too. Until next time, stay curious, stay purposeful, and lead with the courage that sets you apart. Let's build the career and culture where you and all of those around you can thrive, one courageous conversation at a time.